Vice President J.D. Vance sat across from Good Morning America host Michael Strahan, his posture rigid, smile mechanical, every gesture betraying the tension behind the scenes. He was there to discuss the administration's law and order priorities, but everyone in the control room knew the real story. The Tom Homan bribery scandal would define the interview. 3, 2, 1, live, a voice said in Strahan's earpiece. Good morning, America, Strahan began smoothly, that practiced warmth in his voice. We're joined today by Vice President J.D. Vance to discuss new questions about border enforcement and the ongoing investigation into former ICE Director Tom Homan. Vance nodded politely, folding his hands. Always a pleasure to be here, Michael. The exchange sounded routine, but beneath the pleasantries, the air had an edge. Strahan's first question was surgical. Mr. Vice President, reports allege that Tom Homan accepted $50,000 from a private lobbying group seeking contracts with your administration. You've defended him publicly. Are you confident that no ethical boundaries were crossed? Vance's smile didn't move. Tom Homan has dedicated his life to protecting this nation. These allegations are unfounded and frankly insulting. Strahan nodded slowly. That wasn't quite what I asked. Are you confident that no lines were crossed? A beat of silence. Michael, Vance said carefully, as you know, investigations are underway. I think it's inappropriate for me to comment while those processes play out. So that's a no? Strahan pressed. It's called respecting due process, Vance replied, his tone sharpening. Something the media seems to forget exists. The tension thickened. Strahan's expression didn't change. Years of live television had trained him to weather deflection with calm precision. You've spoken often about accountability, he said, but your critics argue that accountability stops when it reaches your own circle. Is there any circumstance under which you would condemn Tom Homan's actions if evidence shows misconduct? Vance exhaled through his nose. You're asking me to engage in hypotheticals. I deal in facts. Strahan leaned forward slightly. The fact is, you haven't answered. In the control booth, a producer whispered, keep the focus on integrity. Cameras zoomed tighter on both faces. Strahan's voice stayed even, his words deliberate. Mr. Vice President, viewers at home expect straight answers. Do you believe the American public deserves transparency from its leaders? Of course, Vance replied quickly. Then let's be transparent, Strahan said. Did the Vice President's office authorize or overlook payments to Tom Homan connected to immigration policy consulting? The question landed like a body blow. Vance's jaw tightened. That's a loaded question, Michael. You're repeating talking points from partisan outlets trying to smear this administration. I'm repeating what's in official filings, Strahan said calmly. The numbers are public. Vance chuckled under his breath. The laugh brittle. Numbers without context mean nothing. You of all people should know better. Strahan's eyes flickered, still polite, but colder now. Context is exactly what I'm asking for. A short pause. Then Strahan asked again, slower this time. Did your office sign off on any payments to Tom Homan? Vance leaned back, crossing his arms. Michael, I'm not going to dignify conspiracy theories with an answer. Strahan's voice cut through the studio's hum. So that's another way of saying you can't answer. I said I won't, Vance snapped, his composure slipping. There's a difference. The silence that followed was palpable. You could hear the faint hum of studio monitors, the shuffle of a camera operator adjusting focus. Strahan's expression stayed neutral, but his tone hardened by a fraction. Mr. Vice President, with all due respect, he began, then stopped himself. Actually, no. With respect to our viewers, you did not answer the question. The words landed with finality. Vance blinked, caught off guard by the shift in tone. Excuse me? You heard me, Strahan said, voice calm but edged like glass. You came here to talk about transparency. I asked you directly about potential misconduct in your own office, and you refused to give a clear answer. That's not transparency, that's avoidance. That's called discipline, Vance shot back. You might want to learn some before lecturing an elected official. The control room director mouthed, cut to wide shot. Strahan didn't flinch. He kept his eyes locked on Vance. Discipline isn't silence, sir. It's accountability. Our viewers can decide for themselves which one they just saw. Vance opened his mouth, his voice rising. You're twisting my words, Michael. This is exactly the problem with the media. You want controversy, not truth. But before he could continue, Strahan glanced toward the camera and gave the smallest hand signal. A quiet click sounded in the guest's earpiece. The vice president's voice faded mid-sentence. Mic feed terminated. The screen image remained live, showing Vance's lips still moving, his expression darkening as he realized what had happened. Strahan faced the camera, unbothered. We'll be right back, he said evenly. The GMA theme swelled, and the broadcast cut to commercial. Inside the studio, the air hung heavy with shock. Producers stared at each other. Strahan exhaled once, long and controlled, then set his notes aside. That, he said quietly, is what accountability looks like. The second the red light on the main camera blinked off, the illusion of calm collapsed. The Good Morning America studio, usually a place of upbeat chatter between segments, was dead silent except for the low hum of equipment cooling. J.D. Vance was still seated, staring across the table at Michael Strahan, the faint hiss of his dead microphone hanging in the air like static. "Is my mic off?" he asked, voice edged with disbelief. The sound engineer in the corner didn't answer. Everyone knew the answer. Vance reached for the lapel clip, yanked the transmitter free, and set it down hard enough to make the metal ping against the desk. "Unbelievable," he muttered, rising from his chair. "You cut me off in the middle of a sentence." Strahan didn't look away from his notes. He flipped through his cue cards, each motion deliberate, his expression unreadable. "We were out of time," he said simply. "That's a lie," Vance shot back. "You did it because I wouldn't give you the sound bite you wanted." Strahan finally raised his eyes, and for a brief second, the warmth that usually defined his on-camera persona was gone. "Mr. Vice President, we gave you 5 uninterrupted minutes to clarify your position. You used all 5 to avoid the question." Vance leaned forward across the desk. "You think you're some kind of hero because you hit a button? You just silenced an elected official on national television." Strahan didn't blink. "No, sir," he said, his voice controlled but cold. "You silenced yourself." The control room door opened, and senior producer Linda Chavez stepped in. Her face was pale, her headset still around her neck. "Gentlemen," she said carefully, "we're live again in 30. Let's clear the set, please." Vance ignored her. "You people love this, don't you?" he said, gesturing to the crew. "You'll clip that moment, run it on loop, and call it accountability. You're not journalists, you're entertainers with a vendetta." Strahan stood now, smoothing his tie, his tone steady but unmistakably final. "We're journalists asking questions. If you came with answers, that moment wouldn't have happened." The producer's voice rose slightly. "Please, Vice President, we have to reset." Vance stared at Strahan one last time, jaw tight, eyes glinting with restrained fury. Then he turned sharply and walked off the set. The door closed behind him with a thud that echoed across the quiet studio. Strahan took a slow breath. "Cut his post-interview feed," he said quietly. "Yes, sir," the tech replied. By the time the next segment aired, a soft feature on autumn travel destinations, the confrontation was already spreading across the internet. Clips of Strahan saying, "You did not answer the question," flooded social media within minutes. Hashtag Vance Meltdown, hashtag Strahan Mic Cut, and hashtag #AccountabilityTV trended simultaneously. The public reaction was immediate and polarized. One camp hailed Strahan as the only journalist in morning television willing to hold politicians accountable. "Finally someone stood up to the spin," one tweet read. Another said, "Cutting his mic was savage but necessary. You can't dodge forever." The other camp, mostly Vance's defenders, called it censorship. "A network silencing a sitting vice president on live TV, that's not journalism," one post declared. "That's propaganda." Inside ABC's Manhattan newsroom, executives watched the engagement numbers climb in real time, millions of impressions before noon. But the celebration was cautious. Virality came with consequences. Linda Chavez entered Strahan's office just after the commercial block. He was sitting at his desk, reviewing the playback on a muted monitor. "They're already cutting it into clips," she said. "It's everywhere." Strahan nodded. "I figured. Network Comms wants to issue a statement. They're trying to decide whether to frame it as a technical cutoff or an editorial decision." Strahan didn't look up. "Tell them to tell the truth. It was editorial." Linda hesitated. "That's going to set off every outlet in D.C." Strahan turned off the monitor. "Then maybe D.C. should start answering questions." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside the office window, the hum of Times Square traffic filled the silence. Finally, Linda exhaled. "You know, I've worked here 15 years. I've never seen a guest implode that fast." "He didn't implode," Strahan said. "He revealed himself." Meanwhile, Vance's team was scrambling. By the time his motorcade left the studio garage, his communications director had already drafted 3 versions of a response statement. "Option A, we say technical issue," the aide said nervously, scrolling on her tablet. "Option B, we accuse them of media bias. Option C, we call for an apology and claim censorship." Vance stared out the tinted window, jaw still clenched. "Do them all," he said. "And tell them to run the clip of me getting cut off on every conservative outlet that'll take it." "But sir," the aide said cautiously, "that'll just amplify the part where you didn't answer. Then they'll see what happens when you try to tell the truth on liberal television," he snapped. She nodded quietly, typing. "Yes, sir." As the car merged into midtown traffic, Vance's phone buzzed with a notification, his face frozen mid-sentence on trending videos, captions screaming, "Mic cut" on live TV. He exhaled sharply, scrolling through the comments. Most weren't kind. He folded. Total deflection. Strahan 1, Vance 0. But one comment caught his attention. It read, "You did not answer the question." The exact phrase Strahan had used. Vance locked the screen, his reflection staring back from the glass, the words looping in his head. In the control booth, the senior producers were reviewing angles for the evening recap. Strahan entered quietly. "Run it clean," he said. "No spin, no narration. Just the raw exchange." "You sure?" Linda asked. "It'll look even harsher out of context." "Good," Strahan replied. "People should see what accountability looks like, unedited." The booth fell silent again. In a world addicted to sound bites, a moment of quiet integrity was the loudest thing anyone could broadcast. And as the clock ticked toward noon, the network prepared to air the clip again. Uncut this time, every pause and silence intact. While across town, J.D. Vance began planning his own revenge tour. The confrontation was over, but the fallout was only beginning. The confrontation was over, but the fallout was only beginning. In the minutes that followed, the studio moved like a machine waking from a controlled crash. Assistants rolling cables, floor managers whispering cues, a graphics operator rebuilding the lower third to remove Vance's name as if erasing ink while it was still wet. Strahan walked the narrow corridor to the newsroom, the calm still on his face, but inside his chest his heartbeat metronomed against the ribs. He had done this long enough to know when a moment was going to live past the morning. This one would. A conference room off the bullpen filled fast. Network comms dialed in from another floor. Legal slid into chairs with yellow pads. Standards and Practices opened a thick binder that seemed to expand with every scandal. Linda Chavez closed the door and stood at the head of the table. We need clarity before noon. Michael, walk us through your decision, she said. I asked him 3 times, Strahan said, voice level. He deflected 3 times. Our duty is to the audience. I stated that he didn't answer and ended the segment clean. Legal's lead counsel tapped a pen. Any language that could be construed as accusatory beyond the question? Strahan shook his head. I kept it to process. No editorial verdict. Good, counsel said. Then our exposure is minimal. But be ready for the word censorship to trend. It already is, a social producer said. Laptop open to an analytics dashboard pulsing red. We're at 6 million views across clips. Engagement is split, but the accountability frame is outrunning censorship 2-to-1. Advertisers? Linda asked. 2 early calls, the sales liaison replied. A bank wants reassurance we're not turning mourning into cable combat. A healthcare sponsor says they support tough journalism but prefer balance. Strahan folded his hands. Balance isn't silence. The door opened and an executive from the news division stepped in, tie loosened, face set to the corporate neutral that signals both approval and caution. Clean clip, he said to Strahan. But the White House comms is blasting inboxes calling this a stunt. Expect booking boycotts. We book people who answer questions, Strahan said. If that's a boycott, it's self-inflicted. Across town, a different room pulsed with a different electricity. Vance's team clustered around a high table littered with phones, coffee cups, and an iPad looping the moment his audio died. The comms director spoke in bullet points. We push hostile environment. We push silencing an elected official. We blast an email to supporters titled, They cut my mic because I told the truth. Fundraising link up top. We book friendlies by afternoon radio, 2 primetime cable hits, and a long sit-down with a sympathetic podcast. Add a line about coastal media elites, another aide said without looking up, typing furiously. That never misses. Vance stood by the window, jaw tight, watching a delivery truck back into an alley. We're not begging for time, he said. We're owning the moment. Get Tom on the phone. Tom Homan, the aide asked. Yes, Vance said. He releases a statement within the hour. Clean. Confident. No apology. At 11:37 a.m., that statement hit inboxes. Homan called the allegation a smear, the money standard consulting, every action lawful and disclosed. The words were crisp, rehearsed, and legally sanded, but they met an answer within minutes. A government ethics watchdog issued a call for a formal review, citing the appearance of impropriety and the public's right to confidence. The 2 press releases collided in the feeds like weather systems. Back at ABC, a media critic slid into a guest chair for the noon hour. Earpieces were checked. The countdown curled down to 0. Strahan's voice was steady as ever. We aired a live exchange this morning that has prompted strong reaction, he said. With us now, the critic praised firm questioning, noted the scarcity of follow-ups in morning television, warned about the optics of the cut. Process matters, he said. If you press clean. You pressed clean. When they cut to package, the executive from news leaned against the control room glass. We can't make a meal out of this all day, he murmured to Linda. Spin cycle burns trust. Then we show our work, Linda replied. No montages. No snark. Just the exchange. In the hallway, Strahan's phone buzzed. A text from a former guest he respected. An epidemiologist who'd sparred with him respectfully during the pandemic. It read, right line. Hard line. Hold it. A second buzz. An athlete he'd interviewed a dozen times. Proud of you. A third, a private number he didn't recognize. He let it go. The afternoon carried the hum of consequences. Bookers started hearing no's couched as scheduling conflicts. One governor's aide emailed a diplomatic dagger. We prefer environments where substantive answers aren't interrupted. Linda forwarded it to the exec with a single line, "We didn't interrupt answers." The comms lead drafted the official statement for the press site. GMA asked direct questions about matters of public concern. When the guest declined to answer, we concluded the segment. Our commitment is to clarity and the audience. Legal cut 5 words. Standards added 2. It went live at 2:06 p.m. The comments filled like a sink. Vance's fundraising email landed at 2:21 p.m. Subject lined, "They tried to silence us." The copy was tight, aggrieved, certain. Within an hour, the campaign's small-dollar thermometer ticked up. Consultants watching the back end grinned. "Outrage converts," one said, not bothering to hide the cynicism. On a whiteboard, someone sketched the evening media run. 2 hits at 7, 1 at 9, a taped interview dropping at dawn. Every arrow pointed away from questions and toward grievance. By late afternoon, a quiet pressure found Strahan in his office. A knock, then the executive who wore neutrality like a suit. "You know I respect the work," he began, "but morning is a different animal. People want coffee, kids to school, a sense that the world won't knock them over before lunch." Strahan listened. "We didn't knock anyone over," he said. "We asked for one straight answer. The world knocked itself." The exec's eyes moved to a framed photo on the shelf. Teammates, helmets off, eyes bright with the kind of focus you don't fake. "Tomorrow, tone down the post-game," he said softly. "No victory laps." "There weren't any," Strahan replied. "There was a whistle." Evening crept in like a slow fade. The city lit its neon. The building's HVAC sighed. Linda stuck her head in the door. "You should see this," she said. In the audio bay, a tech pulled up the raw multitrack from the control board. "We were checking levels during the break," he said, nervous, as if unveiling a secret he wasn't sure should exist. Board audio keeps rolling for a beat after the on-air cut. Catches the room. On a pair of headphones, the moment replayed. Strahan's on-air line, the silence, the theme swell. Then, in the ambient soup of the studio mics, a threaded mutter, low and unguarded. "Vance, off-air," the words blurred by distance but not meaning. The tech soloed a channel, bumped the gain, not enough to distort, just enough to clarify. "You people are a joke," Vance's voice said, small and hard, like a stone thrown from a shadow. "You don't want answers, you want blood." The room held its breath. The tech clicked pause. "It's clean," he said. "Not broadcast. Captured. If we run it, we're fine legally. Ethically." He trailed off, looking to Strahan. "Ethically," Linda repeated, weighing the word like a judge weighs a gavel. Strahan stared at the waveform on the screen, the jagged shape of a sentence that could set the night on fire. He imagined the easy edit, the dopamine of validation, the likes and the cheers and the hollowing aftertaste of a win you didn't earn. "We don't need it," he said finally. "The public saw enough. We asked." He didn't answer. "That's the story." The tech nodded, relief and disappointment crossing his face in the same breath. He saved the file to a secure drive and closed the window. The waveform collapsed to a thin line. The room's noise returned. Fans, distant chatter, the thud of a door somewhere down the hall. At 7:02 p.m., Vance's first primetime hit opened with a slow-motion replay of him mouthing into a dead mic, "Cheerin' blazing." They cut him OFF. He spoke with righteous heat, the cadence practiced, the enemy clear. At 7:15, a graph of donations danced up another bar. At 7:40, an ethics panelist on a different network called for a full inquiry into the Homan payment. At 8:10, a former DOJ official, cool as granite, said, "Questions asked on morning television are the same questions grand juries eventually ask." And at 8:59, just before the late local news, ABC rebroadcast the uncut exchange one more time. No host commentary before or after, only the morning sunlight frozen behind glass, two men at a table, one question placed on the wood like a simple object, and silence where an answer should have been. By the time the studio went dark, the day had sorted itself into camps and clips and narratives with sharp edges. But underneath the noise, inside the quiet rooms where decisions shaped the next day's air, two truths settled like dust. For Vance, grievance raises money. For Strahan, clarity raises the bar. And somewhere between those truths, before Dawn had a chance to rinse the city clean, a new request hit the booking inbox. Vance's office, asking to finish the conversation on GMA, provided the questions were shared in advance. The email sat in the glow of Linda's screen like a dare. She didn't reply. Not yet. The morning after the broadcast smelled like paper and printer toner in both buildings. At ABC, every inbox carried the same subject line, follow-up, Vance interview talking points. At the White House, a different memo circulated, contained Strahan narrative, Phase 1. Inside the network's communication suite, publicists sorted through overnight press clippings. The Post ran morning show Mike Cut raises ethics questions. The Times went with accountability or ambush. CNN calls it an extraordinary on-air moment, and every cable panel is booking someone to argue about it, one assistant reported. Strahan sat at the end of the table, coffee untouched, listening to the tally like an injury report. He spoke once. Stay on message. We asked for clarity. He refused. Comms nodded and wrote it verbatim at the top of the statement. At the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, Vance's press director was printing screenshots of favorable tweets to hand to cable bookers. Fox wants him at 8. Newsmax at 9. We'll pitch the same frame. Strahan lost control, cut the mic, proved our point. He leans in on free speech, ties it to elitism, wrap it in patriotism. Vance walked in half-button shirt, tie hanging loose. He read the draft on the screen. When you speak truth to power, they hit mute. We won't be silenced. He nodded. Good. Send it. By noon the country was split into feeds again. Clips of the cut moment looped between replays of football highlights and storm coverage. A meme showed Strahan in a referee uniform throwing a flag. Delay of answer, 15 yards. Another showed Vance with duct tape over his mouth. Captioned, censored in the morning. The ratings spike was undeniable. GMA's live viewership had jumped 18%, streaming clips doubling those of the previous week. Executives smiled behind the usual concern. Controversy moved metrics. In the quiet corner office, Strahan met with network president Elena Ward. She closed the door and spoke plainly. Michael, you were right to press him. But we're a morning show. We don't want every guest thinking they're walking into cross-examination. I was calm, he said. I know. But optics win or lose advertisers. Let legal handle the letters. You just stick to professional. He nodded, reading between the lines. Be proud, but not too proud. At 4 p.m., the White House press briefing room filled. A reporter from Reuters asked whether the administration supported Vance's remarks. The press secretary paused long enough to measure the answer. The vice president spoke to issues of border integrity, she said evenly. As for television etiquette, I'll leave that to the networks. Translation. Distance without disavowal. Inside Vance's camp, a strategist clapped. Perfect. They're letting us own the fight. That evening, ABC's newsroom released a short edit for international partners. Just 2 minutes of exchange, no cut to commercial, clean sound. On headphones, the moment played like a textbook on tone control. Strahan steady, Vance rising, then silence. Producers from other networks called it a clinic. Strahan watched it once on a monitor, then shut it off. Enough, he said. He was already thinking ahead, to tomorrow's guest, a pediatric surgeon and a hurricane survivor. Normal stories. decent stories. He wanted the morning back. But the country wasn't done with the fight. Cable pundits dragged the clip into primetime, senators retweeted it with commentary, and late-night monologues opened with the line that had already entered the lexicon, "You did not answer the question." By midnight it was a hashtag, by dawn a headline, and by the next day an idiom for every deflection on record. Inside the GMA offices, someone had printed the phrase and taped it above the studio door in Sharpie. Ask it. Mean it. By the end of the week, the phrase had left television and entered Washington. "You did not answer the question" appeared in the congressional record, quoted by an opposition senator grilling a cabinet nominee. The irony was thick enough to chew. J.D. Vance, who once dismissed talk show drama as distraction, now found his own name folded into the country's morning argument about truth, tone, and accountability. At 9 a.m. Friday, Strahan's assistant handed him an envelope marked confidential. Network chair request. Inside was a single line. "Please attend an internal review at 2 p.m. E. Ward, National News Division." He read it twice, slid it back into the envelope, and said, "I knew this was coming." At the same hour in D.C., Vance's team staged a press hit outside the Capitol. Cameras lined up, boom mics tilted forward. The vice president stepped to the podium in rolled sleeves, speaking over a backdrop of flags. "The media no longer asks questions," he declared. "They conduct cross-examinations. They treat disagreement as dishonesty. Last week, I spoke clearly about my values and my loyalty to this country, and when they didn't like the answer, they turned off the microphone. But the American people turned theirs on." Reporters scribbled. Staffers cheered. The phrase, "they turned off the microphone," would become his new rallying cry, printed on campaign merch by that afternoon. Behind the scenes, though, the administration was less amused. A senior aide muttered, "He's milking this too hard. The ethics probe into Homan hasn't even cooled." But no one said it on record. At 2 o'clock sharp, Strahan entered the top-floor conference room of ABC's headquarters. Elena Ward sat at the head of the table, flanked by two senior legal officers and the head of talent relations. On the wall, muted footage from other GMA segments looped silently. A charity drive, a musical performance, a celebrity cooking demo. Every frame a reminder of what morning television was supposed to be. Pleasant, uncontroversial, safe. Elena began without preamble. "Michael, we're proud of your composure. You were factual, calm, firm. But we need to talk about fallout. Affiliates in conservative markets are threatening to drop advertising slots." "Because I asked a question?" "Because you became the story," she said. "And when the host becomes the story, it puts the network in the crosshairs." Strahan didn't move. "I'm not retracting a word." "No one's asking for a retraction," Legal said. "We're discussing optics. You may need to appear on Nightline or This Week to explain the incident in neutral terms." "So a soft apology tour?" he asked. Elena shook her head. "Clarification. Think of it as context management." Strahan looked out the window. "Context management is what got us here." He dodged. "I called it. That's context." "Michael," Elena said quietly, "we're not questioning your integrity. But the brand must be bigger than any segment." He stood, hands on the back of the chair. "Then maybe the brand should stand for something again." She met his gaze, unflinching. "It does. It stands for access. And you may have just closed one very important door." He gave a thin smile. "Maybe it's a door that needed closing." By evening, word of the meeting leaked. A blog headline read, "Strahan facing internal review after Vance clash." It wasn't accurate, no suspension, no punishment, but accuracy had stopped mattering the moment the internet got involved. Comment sections split in two. "He's the last real journalist on TV" versus "He's a grandstanding hack." The next morning, Strahan woke to a phone buzzing on his nightstand. Unknown number. He answered. "Michael, it's Tom Homan," the voice said. There was a pause long enough for the irony to breathe. "I wanted to tell you that you don't scare me," Homan continued. "You think you can smear my name with your ambush questions? I've got a file of my own." "Then show it," Strahan said flatly. "Bring it to light. I'll air it unedited." Homan laughed, low and mean. "You'll regret that tone." The line went dead. Later that day, ABC received an anonymous email with a link to a cloud drive titled Internal Ethics Draft, not for circulation. Inside was a preliminary summary from the Office of Government Oversight, confirming irregular payment channels tied to a consultancy firm linked to Homan. It wasn't proof, but it was enough for investigative producers to start digging. Linda Chavez found Strahan reviewing sports notes at his desk. "Michael," she said, "we've got a problem that's about to become a bigger story." He looked up. "Which problem?" "The one you asked about." By Sunday, 60 Minutes aired a teaser. New revelations in the Homan inquiry. Did the vice president know more than he admitted? Clips played side by side with the original GMA exchange. Strahan's calm voice, the line, "You did not answer the question," and Vance's frozen expression before the mic cut. Twitter erupted again, this time less about censorship and more about who had been lying. A political strategist tweeted, "Turns out Strahan's question aged like wine." At ABC, Elena Ward watched the coverage unfold and said to no one in particular, "Well, that door might just reopen itself." That night, Strahan sat alone in the empty studio, lights dimmed, floor quiet. He replayed the sequence in his mind, not the confrontation, but the silence right after. He realized that silence was the real message, the space where the truth should have been. He looked at the host's desk, the camera still aimed at it, red tally light dark. "The question never changes," he murmured to himself. "Only the courage to ask it does." By Monday morning, the word probe appeared in every headline. The Office of Government Oversight confirmed a preliminary inquiry into federal payments related to consultant Tom Homan's private security contracts. The document didn't accuse Vance of wrongdoing, but it didn't absolve him either. For the first time, the story wasn't about Michael Strahan cutting a microphone. It was about whether J.D. Vance had been trying to hide something worth cutting off. ABC headquarters, 7:30 a.m. Elena Ward entered the newsroom before dawn, phone pressed to her ear. "Run the morning open clean. No commentary. Let the footage speak," she said. The producer nodded. On screen, the replayed moment played again. Strahan's calm voice, Vance's refusal, the 4 words that had become shorthand for deflection. "You did not answer." The clip transitioned into a breaking news headline about the ethics inquiry. Ratings jumped again. This time, the advertisers weren't fleeing, they were bidding. Washington, D.C., 10:02 a.m. Inside the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, Vance's communications director slammed his tablet on the table. "They flipped it," he said. "Now it's not about Strahan being unprofessional. It's about what we didn't say." Vance stayed silent, staring out the window toward the White House lawn. Finally, he said, "Then we make it about the leak. Government overreach. Weaponized bureaucracy. They love that narrative." The team went to work, drafting talking points, pushing allies on social media, planting op-eds titled, "When Asking Questions Becomes Political Persecution." But the tone had shifted. Even conservative commentators were hedging. One host said, "Whether you like him or not, Strahan asked what the public wanted to know." Another added, "If the VP had nothing to hide, he could have answered." Vance scrolled through clips on his phone, watching his own silence in slow motion, the exact moment before the audio dropped. His jaw tensed. He realized the worst possible truth in politics. Sometimes silence is louder than outrage. ABC News Division, 12:45 p.m. Linda Chavez walked into Strahan's office with a printed email from Elena. "Nightline wants you tonight." Straight talk, no flash. They want the journalist, not the ex-football player. Strahan looked up. They're sure about that? They're sure you'll trend again, she said flatly. He sighed. Then we do it right. No gloating. Just facts. Nightline Studio. 8:03 p.m. The segment opened with the host's introduction. 3 days ago, Michael Strahan's interview with Vice President J.D. Vance went viral after a heated exchange ended with the guest's microphone cut. Tonight, with new developments in the ethics probe, we ask, was that the moment America realized the question mattered more than the answer? The camera cut to Strahan. He didn't smile. Sometimes, he said, television wants noise. I wasn't looking for noise. I was looking for clarity. We asked a simple question about payments tied to a government contractor. The public deserved a simple answer. We didn't get one. The interviewer leaned in. Do you regret cutting the mic? No, Strahan replied, because it wasn't about shutting him down. It was about not wasting more time pretending we were still having an interview. Journalism isn't theater. If you won't answer, the act's over. The clip went viral again, this time framed differently. No longer Strahan loses cool, but Strahan stands firm. Capitol Hill, 9:30 a.m., next day. An ethics aide whispered to a reporter outside the Senate chamber. The Oversight Committee's moving forward. They've subpoenaed Homan's financials. And guess who they're crediting for triggering public interest? The reporter smirked. The morning guy with the perfect smile? Exactly, the aide said. That line, you did not answer, might go down as the question that opened the case. Behind the curtain. Inside ABC, Elena Ward watched the news cycle unfold with a mix of relief and calculation. Strahan's reputation had transformed in 72 hours, from reckless host to accidental whistleblower. The boardroom chatter shifted from containment to promotion. Someone even floated the idea of giving Strahan a primetime slot. But Strahan didn't want it. I didn't expose him, he told Linda. He exposed himself. I just refused to look away. Linda nodded. And that's what journalism's supposed to do. He gave a small, tired smile. Then maybe it's time television remembered that. Washington, 6:45 p.m. Vance sat alone in his residence office, the TV muted. His advisors had stopped returning calls after the inquiry announcement. His public approval had dropped 8 points overnight. He rewound the GMA clip again and again. The moment Strahan's voice cut through. You did not answer the question. He poured himself a drink, staring at the frozen image on screen. For the first time, the anger wasn't at the media. It was at himself. The story had started as a clash. It ended as a reckoning. 5 days after the interview that split the country in half, the Office of Government Oversight released its findings. A 42-page report. Dense. Factual. Devastating. It confirmed what Michael Strahan had asked on live television. Payments. Unrecorded. Misclassified. Funneled through a private consultancy connected to Tom Homan. The report did not accuse J.D. Vance of direct wrongdoing, but it painted a picture of reckless proximity. Proximity that should have been answered for. And wasn't. The same 4 words echoed across every channel. You did not answer. That morning, America turned on its screens. On Good Morning America, the lights dimmed slightly. The air was still. The teleprompter scrolled one word at a time. Strahan's voice came through steady, low, deliberate. No smile. No theatrics. Just the weight of truth spoken plainly. When you sit in this chair, you ask questions on behalf of people who never get to. And sometimes, the answers never come. He paused. The studio was silent. But silence, he said, is also an answer. The feed switched to archive footage. The original exchange. The flicker of discomfort. The mic cut. The long breath before the broadcast went dark. Now that silence felt different. It wasn't controversy. It was confirmation. Across Washington, statements poured in. One from the Ethics Committee. We thank members of the press who pursued accountability when others would not. Another from the White House. We respect the independence of journalism. And from J.D. Vance himself. A written release. No cameras. No podium. He called the findings a misunderstanding. He called the interview a setup. He called the fallout political theater. But the public had stopped listening. The story had already written itself. Inside the ABC control room, technicians replayed the broadcast one final time. For the network archive, one camera operator said quietly, "He never raised his voice." Another replied, "He didn't have to." On screen, Strahan looked calm, measured, in control of the only thing that mattered, the question. When the credits rolled, no music played, just a black screen with 4 white words. You did not answer. By the end of that week, the phrase had left television and entered the American vocabulary, in classrooms, in courtrooms, in congressional hearings. Whenever someone avoided truth, someone else would say it. You did not answer the question. Strahan didn't comment again. He went back to the desk, back to headlines and small stories, as if nothing had changed. But something had. Viewers could feel it. The tone of morning television had shifted. A little quieter, a little braver. In the final seconds of that Friday's broadcast, Strahan closed with words that sounded less like television, and more like principle. We live in a time when people talk loud, and listen less. But questions are how a nation listens. And until they're answered, we keep asking. The screen faded to black. No applause. No outro music. Just silence. The same silence that had started it all. And in that silence, America understood something simple, something powerful, something overdue. The truth doesn't shout. It waits. And when the noise fades, it's still there, quiet, steady, unchanged, because the question always remains.